Did you know that in India, budget PC hardware is 92% more expensive than in the rest of the world? Why is that? And how much are other countries charging for their PC parts? Hi, I'm Ryan with PC Customs, and I run a business where I build and flip computers. Recently, I visited my family who lives in Germany, and I was shocked to see how much more expensive some computer parts were there than in the US. Now, as you may have guessed, that experience got me really curious to see how much PC parts costed around the world, and I just had to get to the bottom of it. To do that, I needed to do some research. So I set out on my digital journey, searching far and wide on many different websites, painstakingly compiling a spreadsheet containing all of the data that we're gonna need for this video. Now, what data did I collect? Well, I got the average prices of 10 different PC parts across 5 different countries. My home country, the USA, along with France, India, the UK, and Germany. Now, that's a weird grouping of countries to pick. So why did I pick it? Well, there are 2 reasons. One is that by looking at 5 different countries, we get to look at 4 different currencies: the USD, the British pound, the Indian rupee, and the euro. This is really convenient because it gives us an interesting grasp on the economy of each individual country, potentially giving us insights into why PC parts are priced the way they are. The second reason is that I have viewers in each of the aforementioned countries that have specifically asked that I include their currencies in my videos. And while I can't do that in every video, hopefully this video will do something to satisfy the questions that those viewers are having. By the way, if you want to suggest any video ideas, feel free to join my Discord or comment them down below. Unsurprisingly, each country has their own different place that they buy computers from. So to make sure I was getting the best deals, I reached out to a couple subscribers who are living in the countries that we're looking at to see where they go for their PC parts. The Brits tend to get their parts off Amazon, Currys, Overclockers, Scan, and Novatech. If you're hunting for a good deal or some used parts, Facebook Marketplace, eBay, and CEX seem to be the places to go. Across the channel, LDLC, Material.net, and Amazon.com seem to be the places the French like to go for their new computer parts. For their used parts, they tend to stick with eBay and occasionally Facebook Marketplace. Germany tends to order mostly online, using Amazon and Mine Factory, among others. For their used parts, they generally turn to eBay Kleinanzeigen. Us Yanks generally use Amazon, Best Buy, and Newegg for our brand new parts, except for a very lucky select few of us that have access to a micro center. Why not me? For our used parts, we go to Facebook Marketplace, and on rare occasions, Craigslist. India follows the trend of using Amazon for its new parts, and for their used parts, they use OLX, which is basically just an Oriental eBay. Now, I'm gonna go crunch some numbers, and while I do that, grab a snack, or maybe a drink, because this is about to get interesting. Before we look at the data though, there's a few things that you need to know that are gonna help you to understand what it all means. Out of the 10 components that I searched for prices on, 6 of them were used and 4 of them were new. That gives us a chance to look at low-end, mid-range, and high-end components that are used for both CPUs and GPUs, along with some low-end and high-end CPU and GPUs that are gonna be brand new. This should help to give us an interesting look on how the PC markets compare in different countries, both on the new and on the used side. And hopefully will help us cover most of the budget spectrum. The first piece of hardware that I'm going to compare is the GTX 1050 Ti, an 8-year-old budget graphics card that was relatively low-end when it came out. The prices on the 1050 Ti ranged from a modest $41 in France all the way to about $89.30 in India, more than doubling the price. Interestingly though, the prices on the RTX 2070 Super, our used mid-range GPU, told a different story. They ranged from about $175 in France, rising up to $276 in the UK. That surprised me, especially because the British pound is the most valuable of the 4 currencies that we looked at, which might suggest that their economy is better than any of the other countries that we looked at. However, that seems to not be the case because the UK has consistently been one of the more expensive countries to buy the computer parts in. Anyways, for the highest end used GPU, the RTX 3080, we saw prices from about $457 in France all the way up to $600 in Germany. Right off the bat, we can see that France has great prices on used GPUs. But why might that be? Well, there could be a few reasons, but before we discuss those, let's see if the same holds true for their CPUs. For the used low-end CPU that we looked at, the Ryzen 5 1600X, the US had the highest average price at $65. France, on the other hand, had the lowest price at just over $30. Moving on to the mid-range used chip, the Ryzen 7 3700X. The US again had the most expensive one, coming in at a eye-watering $106. However, this time, Germany surprised us with the lowest average price at $82, taking over France. No, Germany, not again. Bad Germany. Bad Germany. The used Ryzen 7 5800X3D bucks the trend of the US having stupid expensive CPUs, with the US actually having the cheapest list priced at $220. Unsurprisingly, India had the most expensive one at $310. So what exactly does this mean? Well, there's a few patterns that I'm seeing emerge so far. India seems to be the most expensive country to buy computer parts in. This isn't particularly surprising, but is backed up by some data that we're going to get into in a second. On the flip side, France seems to be the best place to get used computer parts. That wasn't quite what I expected. However, looking at where I got my data, we might have a good reason as to why that is. See, for each country, I took the average price of the first 3 listings on the respective marketplace of each country. The difference with France, though, is that I messed up and accidentally used the eBay sold price, which might not actually reflect the listed price because negotiations can happen. That was a mistake on my part. That being said, though, maybe if we look at some new prices, we'll see the same pattern emerge. Only one way to find out. Let's go. Instead of turning to several different marketplaces like we did with our used parts, we are going to use arguably the world's biggest e-commerce platform, Amazon. Because each country uses Amazon as one of their primary sources for buying new computer parts, this felt appropriate. Starting off with the budget GPU, the RTX 4060. Germany had the cheapest price at $320. The UK, on the other hand, surprisingly had the most expensive 4060 at $360. Now, interestingly, with our new GPUs, we actually see a much smaller variance in the price of the parts, as you may have noticed, between the cheapest and most expensive 4060s. If we look at the coefficient of variation, which is basically the spread of the prices for each listing, there's a much smaller average difference in price. With the 4060s, that coefficient of variation was 7%. With the rest of the parts we've looked at, that being all of the used parts, the coefficient was between 20 and 30%, significantly higher. And interestingly enough, we see the exact same thing with our high-end new GPU, the Radeon RX 7900 GRE. Prices did vary quite a bit more from cheapest to most expensive with this graphics card. However, that was because of one outlier, which was the US, which had a significantly cheaper GPU than any of the other countries we looked at, coming in at a tad under $610. Although the rest of the countries ranged between about $710 and $790. Pretty tight spread for such an expensive GPU. Interestingly, we see a similar trend with our CPUs. The US, Germany, France, and the UK had the cheapest ones, coming in at just around $130. India was the exception though, charging a borderline extortionate $238.68. Curiously though, in India, the Ryzen 7 7800X3D, the best gaming chip on the market, cost about the same as the rest of the countries. In fact, it wasn't even the most expensive country to buy it in. That would be France, coming in at $481 and a bit of change. Germany, on the other hand, had the cheapest one, coming in at about $430. Even more interesting than that, though, is that our most expensive CPU that we gathered data on had the lowest average variance in price at just over 4%. That really took me by surprise, especially given how volatile the prices in India and the UK have been on the lower end parts. So now that we've actually seen the data, let's have a look at what it can actually tell us. But before we do that, I am going to ask you to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video or if you're getting any value out of it. A huge thanks to Dubby for sponsoring today's video. They make high quality, all natural energy drinks that on average cost less than $1. If you want to support the channel and get a massive discount while doing so, use the code PCCustoms for a discount. Feel free to order some at the link down below. Anyways, where were we? Oh yeah, the data. There are a few things that stood out to me. First off, despite its strong showing in the used section, mostly due to my mistake, France is not a cheap place to buy computer parts. In fact, it's right in the middle of the road. If we rank each country based off of their average price, the US and Germany are actually the cheapest places to buy parts, coming in with an average ranking of 2.3 out of 5 each. France had an average of 2.6, with the UK having an average of 3.2. All of that is pretty unsurprising, as those 4 countries traded places between first and fourth pretty regularly. India, usually being the most expensive, had an average of 4.3, which is kind of what you'd expect. However, if we look at the average price of all the components combined, rather than where each country ranked on average, we get a weirdly different story. The US had the lowest average cost, coming in at about $260. Where the story changes, though, is with France. See, they actually ended up with the second lowest average cost, edging out Germany by $6. Not a huge difference, but noticeable. This is probably due, at least in part, to me looking at the sold prices of the components that we looked at in France, rather than the list price. And again, that's on me. Sorry for not giving you good data. However, it is interesting to see that France ranked lower than Germany, but still had a lower average cost. The UK and India had the 4th and 5th lowest average prices, so really the 1st and 2nd highest average prices, following the trend of them being ridiculously expensive. In fact, as the intro to this video stated, India tends to have PC prices that are 92% more than in other countries. However, that only really applies to the budget hardware, which doesn't really paint the full picture. As soon as you start getting into the more expensive components, its difference in price drops significantly. And I think that might have to do with a couple of things. The biggest of which being India's average annual income, which happens to be just around 4,000 US dollars. Not very much, basically meaning that PCs are a luxury item, and if you want to get into PCs, it's gonna cost you an arm and a leg. I think that's shown perfectly with our CPUs. The i3-14100F, for example, was on average 79% more expensive than the other countries. That's $105. That's not an insignificant amount of money. However, if you look at the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, we see India have an average price of only $10 or 2% more than its competition. In fact, as you may remember, India didn't even have the most expensive 7800X 3D. That honor went to the UK, which might I add, also is ridiculously expensive. The British pound is the most valuable of the currencies that we looked at. And on top of that, the UK had the 2nd highest average annual income, but prices are still through the roof compared to France, Germany, and the US, which blew my mind. Anyways, essentially, in India, those who are struggling with money aren't gonna be able to buy into the PC market as effectively. However, those who aren't are gonna have a pretty good time with it. And in the UK, well, just don't build a PC in the UK because the prices are stupid. They're ridiculously high compared to the other Western countries that I looked at, and I'm actually kind of frustrated on everybody in the UK's behalf. Plus, from what I've heard, y'all are pretty stubborn when it comes to negotiating, and there's not much wiggle room in the price, which means that PC flipping can be pretty hard to do there. Speaking of, if you want to learn to flip PCs, then check out this video on screen right here. This has been Ryan with PC Customs. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will catch you guys next time. Ryan, out.